Thank you everyone for joining us. Today we are looking at a case study for peer-to-peer fundraising, specifically how Run for Water teamed up with Shift Charity and produced their biggest fundraising event ever. So I'm really excited today to have our co-panelists with me. We've got Brady Josephson, who is the strategist for Shift Charity and CEO of the nonprofit supply company. We're happy to have Brady here. Hey, Brady.
Hey, happy to be here.
Great. And we have Peg Peters, who is the executive director of Run for Water.
Hi, thanks a lot for having me.
Glad to have you. All right, guys. So today we're going to look at the case study of how you guys teamed up to produce some excellent results when it came to one of your fundraising campaigns. Looking at some of these, we've got a 78% increase in fundraiser signups, 160% increase in the number of fundraisers, 37% increase in fundraiser revenue, and 35% increase in website traffic. First of all, wow, those are pretty fantastic results. So I'd love to dive into how you guys accomplished this. I'm pretty sure I speak for all of the attendees today. Just with bated breath, we are excited to hear about this. So first, I guess, where did you guys get started? How did you start the planning process? Peg, I think this will start with you. So, I mean, you had the need, and yeah, take it from there.
Yeah. So yeah, a couple of years ago, we Run for Water has been around 10 years. We do an annual running event out in BC, Canada here to raise money for clean water projects in Ethiopia. And we've been partnering with some other organizations to help us do fundraising, but we really wanted the opportunity to own our own data. And that was really important for us to be able to track and receipt our donors on our own platform. And so we thought about building our own, and it was really expensive. And we reached out to Brady, who I'd been working with for a while, and he said, hey, I came across something called Kindful. You guys got to take a look at it. It might be a really good fit for you. And so we took a look at Kindful, and we were one of the early adopters in Canada. There was another organization who had been using it in Calgary, and we chatted and said, hey, this could be a really good fit for us. So we kind of started the process of investigating, and we realized that Kindful really had all the bells and whistles that we were looking for in order to not just track our donors and then receipt automatically, using an automated tax receipt system, but it really gave us the ability to start fundraising pages for our runners and be able to track all the donors that they would get as well, because each of the runners has a network of people that they reach out to raise money. And now all of those people are coming through our portal, coming through our Kindful page, and it allowed us to really see an increase both in fundraising pages created and in overall donations and donors.
That's awesome. So Peg, you're thinking, hey, I've got this race. I want to raise some money. Reach out to Brady. Brady, he hits you up and says, hey, help me raise some money. So where did you start from there, Brady?
Well, the overarching goal for us in working with Run for Water was to start moving them towards kind of a year-round fundraising organization. Like, there's an unreal community, and what Peg and his team has done is really fascinating and impressive. But it's really, volunteer-driven and grassroots, but they're looking to invest, and so that's why the need for data and knowing who these donors are and being able to control more of the experience was important. So that was kind of the overarching thing, and that's what led to the decision of saying, hey, let's use something like Kindful, where you can manage donor data and track fundraisers and things like that. So you'll see on the slide here, we try to do this with varying degrees of success for each client, where we just really pick like 3 objectives and then no more than 3 key results for each objective. And this will often cover like a 12-month period. Sometimes it's smaller, but kind of what are the bigger things that we're working towards. And the number 2 there was the improve the runner experience, and kind of how we'd be measuring things is how many fundraiser signups can we get, how many people would be active, and how much would we raise. And this objectives and key results methodology I really like. It comes out of like the 80s, and Intel and Google and tons of tech startups adopt it. But one of the key things is you set goals that are almost unreachable. So you set goals that you really only expect to achieve 70 to 80% of. So it shouldn't necessarily be tied to like personal performance. But what I like about it is often, when we set goals, either as a consulting agency like us, or you set goals as a staff, everyone, whether they're trying to or not, you kind of, undersell or undershoot, because you want to reach your goals, right? But what ends up happening is when we play real conservatively, we don't try for things, we don't work as hard as we should. So I think this kind of, what are our objectives, what are the key results, and the buy-in was hugely important. And Peg and I having a relationship before, and kind of knowing international development, which is more my background, I think there was a lot of good partnership and buy-in early on, which is huge in a project like this. And so then to kind of align behind, here's what we're going to try and achieve, like that's a lot of the hard work. And then from there, the tactics, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, are relatively easy. It's the simpler part of things. But those big decisions of what are we working towards, and then how do we get some tools in our hands that can allow us to do it was important.
Great. Yeah, so you kind of teed up the next question well, but what were some of the strategies behind the messaging and price points for this campaign?
Yeah, so in the peer-to-peer world, almost every breakdown, whether it's like big organizations, Charity Water, or Run Walks, or small organizations, almost across the board it breaks down where if you have 10 people who say yes they want to fundraise, only about 5 or 50% of those people will actually set up a page and fundraise. Of those 10, 20% or 2 of those 5 will actually succeed, and only about 10% of the 10, or 1 of those 5 who actually fundraise, will be a superstar. And so the 2 strategies you have are either A, you get more people to say yes to fundraise, right, and then it just increases the number all the way down the funnel, so to speak, or you do a better job of having people be superstars, successful, or start their page. And so everyone should pursue both kind of avenues, but for us in particular, we spent a lot of time focusing on how do we just get more people to say yes. There's a great cause, Clean Water, Ethiopia, Run for Water has a 100% model, so it's really tangible, it's really accessible. But they were getting 3, 4, 5,000 runners pegged sometimes, yeah. But only 100 people would actually say yes to fundraising. And so when we looked at that, we thought, man, that's where the biggest opportunity is. So the messaging and the price point was one, to make it feel really, really accessible. So we lowered kind of the suggested fundraising goal down to like 125. We tried to make it feel very realistic. We tried to put some impact metrics behind it, and then the bigger thing I think was that
on that for a second. Yeah, that for me as an executive director, that was one of the things that was really helpful, in that we needed to quantify what the fundraising actually meant. Because if you just say water for Africa, it's way too general. No one cares about that. But if you say, here's the community that we're going to be helping, we do large-scale water systems for an entire community. So we say, this is where your money's going. It's going to this particular place. And your fundraising goal of $125 actually brings water to an entire family in that community. And so that's kind of been our metric over the last number of years. We know it takes about $35 to bring one person clean water for life. So when we said this is your goal, that gave people say, oh, I can do that. I could raise $125. That's my goal then. And so we began to use that kind of messaging with specific targets, with a particular place for a particular kind of family, and that really helped us gain more traction building fundraisers. Rather than just donors. A donor is good, but a donor gives one time. A fundraiser goes into their networks of people, and they get excited because it's not just about their money that they're contributing, it's about their network that they're bringing with them, and that's really what we were looking for.
Yeah, that's great. So I've been flashing up on the screen here some different examples from your campaign. So this first one that we're looking at here is your example of how you really put a tangible result to the work that you're asking people to participate in. So the money you're raising is going to this place, it's doing this thing. And then this next example that you were talking about briefly is just how do you make it more tangible for the one person to join? Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's, again, having a system like Kindful whereby they can log in, we can say, okay, all you need to do within under 2 minutes, you put your name, address, your email address, and boom, here's a pre-populated fundraising page appears with a link. Well, now it just takes all that kind of the headache of how do I create this and what do I got to do? You got to make it really, really simple for people, because if it takes them longer than 2 minutes, they're just going to delete it and move on to their next thing that they're interested in. So you have to make this really simple, and doing that, working with Brady and Kindful was allowed us to make kind of pre-populated pages with a video already inserted and these kinds of things that they could send out.
Yeah, that's great. So we're kind of looking at kind of the broad, big picture of how to get people engaged. But I think you're kind of alluding to the next question is how did you guys use personalization and customization to deliver this message?
Well, and if I just wanted to touch on one thing that Peg touched on there. The other hugely important thing with tangibility, which is just really important in fundraising, period, but a simple story or a real tangible story is hugely important in peer-to-peer, because they end up playing like a game of telephone, right? Because as Peg said, they go into their own networks. And so if you have this really convoluted campaign or a complex story, you're asking people who don't know this world to then tell that story. And so packaging it up and keeping it really simple, like $35 provides clean water to life to a person in Sisigi, Ethiopia, or 125 for a family. That's really easy to remember and retell. And so that's really important to think about when you set up your own campaign. Whatever that dollar number is and the impact equation is, or maybe it's more difficult for you, but keeping it simple, story-based, and retellable is hugely important.
Having that elevator speech down, if you will.
Nope. We lost him.
Yeah.
For a second. There you go.
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the personalization and customization, I actually think this is something that we could have done better with. So part of our challenge here was the event registration was on a different system besides the website and besides Kindful, but then the donations and fundraising were in Kindful. And so we kind of had to manually automate some processes internally to transfer data from registrations into emails and then emails to fundraising pages. And so that's actually where we and Peg's team spent quite a bit of time. So even though the data process was better, it was still not as seamless as it could be. And what happens is then you can't be as personalized or as custom because you lose data in that process. So we can't reference as many specific things as we could have, say, if they registered directly through Kindful, or if there was a full integration, like by age range or their geographic location, find a running group near you, or this is what data helps enable, is more personalization and customization. So we didn't do a ton of that, but I'd say the overarching thing is we really tried to make it feel personal. So a person from Peg's team, Maddie, was the fundraising point person coordinator. So every email that came out with tips or anything else came from Maddie, and you had a phone number you could call. And we created a guide with images and tips, and we tried to make it feel like they were supported from real humans that run for water. And so we tried to make the experience feel a bit more human as much as we could. And again, I think half the value of those guides and tips and things is just the fact that they exist, right? So people have so much fear and anxiety when they're going to create a fundraising page. It is nerve-wracking. You've got technology. You've got to ask people for money. You've got to put yourself out there. So anything that we can do to actually reduce that anxiety, or even just appear to reduce that anxiety with customer service and guides, and we're here for you, that's where we really spent the time trying to make things more personal and human that way.
Yeah, I think One of the things we did, talking about your next thing, deliver this to the audience, is, again, we asked, hey, are you willing to fundraise? So we asked that as part of the registration process, and then if they said yes, then obviously those are our hot leads, and so we'd email them and say, okay, it's really simple. Here's what you got to do. Click here, set up a page, and then we gave them follow-up emails, kind of like Brady was saying, which is to say, it's a three-step process, right? Take this link, put it on Facebook, and just say, hey, here's what I'm doing, and here's why I'm doing it. And and then number two, send an email out to 10 friends and ask each friend for $10, and that kind of stuff. So we actually gave them really tangible. If you just say go fundraise, like almost no one will. They'll go, yeah, sounds great, but it's not the world they live in, so they don't know how to do that. But if you give them almost some script that they can use, and then point them to the links to either a guide or a link to their fundraising page, that really enabled our fundraisers to be empowered to go out and try to make it and try to make their goal. So
yeah. So this is one of the emails that you sent out, and I see you have a link to the fundraising resources right there. So let's take a look at some of that. If you want to kind of talk us through some of this and your intentionality behind it.
Yeah, I think like Greg said, a lot of people want to fundraise, but they don't necessarily know. And so some of the things that obviously I knew being in the peer-to-peer world and fundraising world is basically the more personal emails you send, the more money you raise. Like that's sharing on Facebook's great, but still the number one ingredient for fundraiser success is sending personal emails. So, trying to make that clear to the fundraisers of saying, because the temptation is, I shared it on Facebook and I'm done. And that's what a lot of people do because it's easy, but it doesn't really work. So social is a great component, but it's kind of what comes in at the end, and it's kind of the icing on the cake. It's not the flour or the batter. I don't really make cake, so I don't know how to describe that analogy. So we tried to provide, again, some simple tips, and then the guide was actually probably too big. Like, it was a mega guide. There was a lot of stuff in there, information on Ethiopia and Sisiga and Run for Water, and the other thing that we're trying to do is almost create levels. So there's someone who will create a page, send one email, slam it on Facebook, raise $50, and they're off, which is fine. But there will be some people that are going to like read the whole guide, and start their own blog, or there's like really intense people. And so we wanted to have different kind of support levels for people who would fit different categories. So having this page with just like, here's some tips, and then you get the email, boom, that's enough for some people. Other people want to, post an image on Instagram and customize it, and then other people want to actually, make a short video on information and stats in Ethiopia. And so we tried to have all that information, so there's kind of as much here as you needed or wanted. And then always, if you want more or have questions, really easy to contact someone at Run for Water.
Yeah, that's great. So I think this is kind of how you're engaging someone who's signed up. But what about your overall online strategy? And then I know because we've looked at this, but how did the Google grant play a role in recruiting more fundraisers?
Maybe I'll talk briefly on the Google grant, and then Peg can talk a little bit more about just their event, because they have a really solid event strategy that was in place before us, right, in terms of how to get race registrations. Our big contribution to the strategic side of that was making fundraising a lot more easy, accessible, tangible, and more in focus during the registration process, right? Because that's where the vast majority of fundraisers would come from.
Right.
So we really just tried to tap into what was already there and like really put fundraising front and center and make it harder to avoid. So if someone didn't sign up, it's because they didn't want to, not because they didn't hear about it. And I think that's another key point, whether it's fundraising or making donations. Those of us that are in it every day and we look at the copy and we run 18 test emails, we feel like we're just spamming the crap out of people, and everyone should know about this. But if you actually get out and talk to donors, and we didn't talk to too many people, but I'm sure there's people who register for the race who still don't know that fundraising was a component. right? And it's just because that's how people are. They're busy. They don't catch all the details. So, you know, having consistent messaging more prevalent throughout the whole thing was really our part of the online strategy. And then the Google grant, we didn't have the tracking set up because it was multi-tool, multi-domain. So I can't tell you how many people actually signed up directly from a Google grant to race. But we know that we brought in like 60,000 visitors to their website from the Google ad grant. So that played some role in helping, you know, drive attendance or awareness of who the organization is and what they could do. And that's a lot of people coming to a site that, you know, wouldn't ordinarily come to a site. So those are kind of our two main components. I don't know if Peg has more on just kind of the overall event strategy.
Yeah, I mean it's because it's a still a high caliber running event, half marathon, 10K, and a 5K. It's not just a kids fun run. We take the running part of it seriously as well. So we're kind of dealing with two different audiences, right? You have people that really just want to come out to the event and run, which is fine. And then you, out of that group, because it is a charity run, you try to focus on, hey guys, yeah, come out and run, but we tried to use our online stories, the stories that we'd send by email and on our website and other things, and use the stories of the difference that clean water makes in people's lives. So we put videos up about here's a story of, you know, a girl in Ethiopia whose life is forever changed because she doesn't have to walk for water for 4 or 5 hours a day, and now she gets to pursue her dreams and get an education. So we would put those kinds of stories up as kind of opportunities and hooks to get people to move beyond just a runner. So the idea was to say, hey, this year why don't you run and raise? And that kind of became some of the language we used to saying, you know, don't just run this year. Why don't you raise some money and make a difference, and use the stories as the way to hook people and get them engaged.
That's great. I have one quick clarifying question for Brady. With the Google grant, just specifically, had you applied for the Google grant for Run for Water specifically for this campaign, and then use those funds to develop an ad campaign to drive registrations?
They already had the Google ad grant previously, but we took it over, and then so we could build it towards they also built a new site. We didn't build it, but we were involved in the process. Mm-hmm. And so we rebuilt their AdWords account for the new site, but then also with the campaign and the key messaging and the different races, and so it definitely reflected everything that was going on, but they had it previously. The great thing about Run for Water and a run is that search volume is really high, right? People are looking for running information and running clubs, and so we were able to tap into some of that. What's challenging with the Google grant for some organizations is just not a lot of people are searching for, you know, international development causes to give to. It just doesn't happen. So there's still value in the Google ad grant, but someone like Run for Water, we spent $10,000 every single month because so many people were looking for that type of related content.
Yeah, and really taking advantage of those keywords specifically for them. Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. So the event has happened. It went great. What was the post-event follow-up strategy? What did that look like? Why don't you start, and then Brady, how about you hop in?
You know, it's kind of, you take the big hopper, right? So you take, you know, we have thousands of runners, and so we obviously send out a video and a thank you to all those that ran, and we gave some metrics about here's how many people got clean water because of this. Here's how many people. Here's how many hours that were saved because people will no longer have to walk for the water. So we kind of gave that kind of stuff. But I think the great thing that we did as a board, I mean, it's a volunteer organization. We have 2 part-time people, but you know, Brady really pushed us to say, hey, listen, because we have access to all this data, let's take some of our the donors that we got, and let's phone them up. Let's actually phone them up, and we divided a list of kind of our top 40 donors or top 50 donors like that. We gave we had a phone day, and it was kind of funny. We got our board together, and we all spread out in a bunch of an office, and we each board member had a list of 5 to 8 people. And they got on the phone and just said, hey, thank you for donating to Run for Water this year. We really appreciate it. I'm on the board. It took a minute or two, but that was huge for kind of the follow-up. Just doing that personal contact with some of our larger donors on the phone. I mean, I would technically do that a lot as an executive director, but to have our board, make 100 phone calls or something like that was a really cool way to give that hands-on thank you that I think is really important when it comes to fundraising. And then the great thing is, again, having the data. We would set reminders because I can track who donated what and when and how much. As I got word in the next couple months that our water projects were coming to completion, we would get photos out of there. We would send those to our donors and say, hey, remember you donated in May last year? Well, it's September now. We haven't forgotten about you, and we just got word that the well is finished and 8,000 people have clean water. So thank you so much. Here's a couple photos. So that begins to start this relationship that we have. So it's not just they wrote a check and they're out of they're out of our hair. It's like we now have opportunity to send them thank yous and to give them follow-ups and that kind of thing.
Great. Brady, anything to add on?
No, I think I think we did a good job, but I think we could have done even better. And this is where I'd say a lot of people and peer-to-peer campaigns really fall flat, is after the event or after the goal is reached. So and it's tough because we're trying to have real important discussions about what do we do 2 months from now, and Peg's running around getting water bottles, and they have meetings with the police, and it's just chaos leading up to an event. But it's so important to think about what are we going to do afterwards before you get too close to the event. Otherwise, you can't pull anything off. So I think we were able to do some of that, which is why we were able to do quick email turnarounds. We were prepared for these metrics and these infographics, and we'd kind of pre-designed the thank you landing page before, so we could just plug information in and have the race updates and impact up. So we did a pretty good job there. And like what Peg said, having that tangible project as the ask creates a great reporting, stewardship, follow-up opportunity later on, because we can talk specifically of Sasiga and the water project like they did. Whereas again, if you go back to just, we're doing good stuff in Africa, please support us. What do you report on? It's really, here's some good stuff that we did. So being tangible helps on the front end, but I think it also really helps on the back end of campaigns as well.
Yeah, I think that kind of leads into this next question: is why is it so important to have the right tools in place? Brady, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I'm more and more convinced that a good or bad tooling decision has really significant impact on an organization's ability to raise money. And that just comes as we work with more and more organizations who have different CRMs or different websites or different layouts, or work with different agencies or different donation tools. And then, we're hired to help raise funds. And the tool really dictates, unfortunately, a lot of what you can and can't do. And having a poor tool for the wrong job just makes everyone's lives more difficult. So just at a fundamental level, if you choose the wrong tool, you're already behind the 8 ball. And so that's why the tooling decision was really important for us and Peg to figure out before we got too far into it, so we could do some of the things that we needed to do. And for us, it was user experience and data. That's primarily what it always comes down to for us. I don't care if finance has to work twice as hard or more volunteers need to spend more time coding things. If the user experience is better, it's worth it. And if you can get more meaningful data, it's worth it. So tell your finance and IT team to suck it up, because this is your job, this is your business. And I didn't say that to them. Obviously, I don't know if Peg did. But that's what it was. So user experience of just, like pre-populated content, like Peg said, being able to have visually appealing campaigns, make it really easy for people to sign up, right? That was and donate was really important. And then to be able to get, we wouldn't really be able to get some of those metrics you shared in the very first slide if we didn't change tools, because a lot of third-party tools have a lot of limitations on what data you can and can't get. And then again, the biggest thing for Run for Water moving forward was to try to start building relationships with these fundraisers and these donors. And not that data equals relationship, but data is a starting point that you can build off to create a relationship. Whereas in the past, the tool that they had, you wouldn't even get information on who the donors were, so you can't report back or begin to build that relationship because you do not know and have no access to who they are. So that's what it was really important for us. And
yeah, that's great. So speaking of moving forward, Peg, how are you continuing to use these tools and new strategies to grow Run for Water?
Well, I think for us again, the key for us is we've got a great amount of runners are coming out. It's almost like we don't have to necessarily grow our race anymore, but we really want to move the needle on how many of our runners are actually donating and engaging. And so this tool, using Kindful to be able to look back at our kind of metrics to look, okay, so who gave last year? When did they give? How much? Were they just giving one-off donations, or were they giving through fundraising pages? Or we can track all that, and then we can customize messages to them, and that's what we're doing this year. We're looking at, hey, you gave $100 last year to Run for Water. It made this difference last year. We're doing this campaign this year. We'd love to count on your support. Would you consider donating again? So because we've got that, we can track that, and we can go after, rather than just putting a blanket email out to all of our runners, we can actually do a targeted email to our more donor lists and our fundraisers, and we can kind of separate those people. Who are our heroes last year? Who are the ones who maybe they're not high roller income people, but they're really passionate about raising money. And so I want to work with those people, and so they almost become like, man, part of my little army, because they're volunteers, and they're like, hey, I'm so excited. My goal is to raise $1,500, and we had people last year raising $1,500, $2,000 because they're just so passionate about it, and those are the people we want to stay engaged with and give them the tools they need to succeed. So we're seeing that grow even this year. So yeah, we're excited.
Yeah, that's great. You touched on something that I think is worth noting even further. It's that idea that sometimes your biggest advocates and your biggest champions are not the ones with the deepest pockets, and it's sometimes hard to identify that. But what I hear you saying, and from my experience as well, is having a real big a robust picture of your donor and having that data to be able to kind of look at some of these trends is really key to be able to identify and then engage these people even further.
Yeah, exactly. And you can even try stuff. We can try a few things and say, hey, let's do a particular ask, like let's see if we can get our donors to, hey, can you donate $50, or can you donate $125? What's our target? And then how many did we hit when we asked for a particular amount? And it's really interesting when it just comes to fundraising that you kind of get what you ask for. So if we ask for 35, you're going to get 35. If you ask for 125, more than likely you'll get a bit more than you thought. So that's an interesting thing, and we can kind of look at the trends over the last number of years now and say, okay, where do we succeed and what worked, and we can kind of continue to build on that.
Yeah, that's great. So if you want anything more from Brady, you can find Brady at shiftcharity.com or at Brady Josephson on Twitter, Peg at Run for Water on Twitter, or runforwater.ca. You can learn more about their fantastic mission and learn about their upcoming runs. And of course, if you're looking for any CRM or fundraising needs, please visit us at kindful.com. Again, thank you, everyone, and thanks, Brady and Peg.
Thank you guys very much.
Thanks.